have two readings to introduce today's sermon topic. The first is from A Strange Stirring, The Feminine Mystique and American Women at the Dawn of the 1960s. It's by Stephanie Kuntz. Stephanie is an Evergreen State College professor, and she's a nationally recognized authority on the American family. In her book, A Strange Stirring, she examines the impact of Betty Friedan's 1963 book, The Feminine Mystique, on readers then and its relevance today. She writes, "Books do not become bestsellers because they are ahead of their time. They become bestsellers when they tap into concerns that people are already mulling over, put together ideas and data that have not yet spread beyond specialists and experts, and bring these together in a way that is easy to understand and explain to others. A large group of young women who had their gender consciousness raised by their experiences in the civil rights movement, something that unbeknownst to them had also happened to their foremothers in the 19th century women's rights movement. In the 1840s and 50s, idealistic women have flocked to the abolitionist cause, outraged by the horrors of slavery. But they became frustrated when men refused to allow them at special meetings or vote on important strategy decisions. And some eventually began to organize on behalf of women's rights as well. Whatever the limits of Friedan's book for today's readers, her insistence on the need to break down prevailing assumptions about women, work, and family, and to look for the societal origins of dilemmas that are often experienced as purely personal, remains extremely relevant. Betty Friedan asked us to imagine a world where men and women can both find meaningful, socially useful work and also participate in the essential activities of love and caregiving of children, partners, parents, friends, and neighbors. Today that goal is even more relevant than when she wrote The Feminine Mystique. My second reading is from the book Contradictions, Tracking Poems. They're by Adrienne Rich, one of my favorite essayists and poets. She writes, "Dear Adrienne, I'm calling you up tonight as I might call up a friend, as I might call up a ghost, to ask you what you intend to do with the rest of your life. Sometimes you act as if you have all the time there is. I hope you've got something in mind. I hope you have some idea about the rest of your life. In sisterhood, Adrienne." In her novel Meridian, Alice Walker writes, "I will come forward and sing from memory songs that we'll need once more to hear." Well, perhaps one of those songs we will sing from memory, or should sing from memory, is Helen Reddy's I Am Woman, which became the anthem of the women's liberation movement in 1972. And I ask today, is women's lib something of the past, or do we still need to hear and sing those songs again? Here in the United States, continuing attempts to erode reproductive rights remind us that the struggle for women's health care access is not over. Just read the latest results in a Mississippi law. Although pay equity, equal pay for equal work, is inching up, full-time women workers make only 80 cents for every dollar earned by men, a gender wage gap of 20%. And for women of color, that gap is even wider. The number of women speaking out almost weekly in the Me Too movement brings into stark relief the reality of sexual harassment and assault of women at all levels of society. These issues remind us that women's liberation, true equality, is not yet fully realized. As we heard in the story, March is Women's History Month, a time to celebrate changes that have affected women and men in every person in this room, and also a time to be reminded that true liberation is indeed a work in progress. The theme of this 2019 Women's History Month is Visionary Women, recognizing those often against social convention and local and legal restraints have created a legacy that expands possibilities for generations to come. Now, the roots for Women's History Month reach back to 1857, the year women working in New York City factories staged a protest over their working conditions, and we heard that in one of the stories as well. So in 1911, the first International Women's Day was proclaimed. Then President Jimmy Carter in 1980 declared the week of March 8th as Women's History Week here in the United States, and Congress later expanded that to the entire month of March. This year marks also a major achievement for women in this country, the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution. In 1919, Congress passed an amendment which declared the right to vote shall not by any state be declined or abridged on account of sex. The amendment was then submitted to the states, and each state, of course, had to ratify that, and that was completed on August 18th, 1920. So celebrations are being planned for this year and also next year to commemorate the historic move toward full citizenship rights for more than 1/2 the U.S. population. Women's suffrage was the result of decades of commitment and campaigning by women and men who believe that no one class of people is solely entitled to membership and to citizenship in this country. Visionary women made these changes and will continue to make them in the future. Those changes certainly impacted my life. In the 1960s, I taught junior high school in the Shoreline School District north of Seattle before my first daughter was born. Now, those were the days when a woman who was visibly pregnant was required to resign from her teaching position. I'm still not quite sure why that rule existed. Perhaps school boards felt that seeing a pregnant teacher might lead to student questions about exactly how that had happened. So, in September 1964, I was a stay-at-home housewife and mother. And I was at home looking out my front window, watching my neighborhood children going off to school. That first September, I had not started school since I had been 6 years old. I felt very sad watching them go. I had a strong sense I was missing out, that I wasn't doing something that I would like to do. Just a few days after that, a friend stopped by, bringing a book. She said, "You should read this. I think you'll find it's interesting." And she handed me a copy of Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique, which had come out in 1963. So I absorbed the book after washing diapers, and that was when we didn't have all those throwaway diapers. Washing diapers and while Christy napped, and experienced an aha moment. I realized I was not alone in feeling an emptiness at just staying at home, cleaning house, and caring for my wonderful baby. I found in the pages of that book I had lots of company. Women who wrote to Friedan saying, "What a sense of relief. Now I know I'm not alone." Or, "Suddenly, I understand why I feel depressed." Why did I, along with so many other women, resonate with the ideas in Friedan's book? And first of all, what is exactly the feminine mystique? Friedan tells us that the feminine mystique says that the highest value and the only commitment for women is the fulfillment of their own femininity. It puts forth the notion that a woman's role in society is to be a wife, mother, and housewife, and nothing else. The mystique, Friedan points out, is an artificial idea of what femininity is, that says having a career and or fulfilling one's individual potential somehow goes against women's preordained role. The mystique of essential womanhood is sustained by a constant barrage of images. Think of those 1950s refrigerator and cleaning product ads that lift up the virtue of keeping house and raising children, a homemaker, nurture, mother image as being the only way to achieve essential womanhood. Now, the feminine mystique still confines women in some religious and cultural traditions to the home. Now, Friedan ably dissected the messages of women's magazines, analyzing their emptiness, the emptiness and emphasis of buying more household products, a self-fulfilling prophecy designed to keep women in a fabricated role. She also analyzed Freudian analysis and the ways women were blamed for their own unhappiness and lack of fulfillment by not living up to the mystique's standards of femininity. The feminine mystique awakened many readers to the realization that the homemaker mother image being spread across the land was a false idea that hurt women, families, and society, denying everyone the benefits of a world in which all people could participate and work, if they so wished, to their fullest. For me, that meant that the year after I read the book, I left with the opportunity to teach part-time at the newly opened Shoreline Community College, whose administrators did not care that I was pregnant, visibly, with my second daughter. Apparently, once young people get to college, they were immune to such visual triggers of homosexuality. Well, the feminine mystique launched the second wave of feminism, a time of increased focus on women's history, the rise of feminist presses and women's bookstores, and yes, even the purported and much exaggerated bra burnings. Remember those? Well, the first wave of feminism, of course, had begun in the 1850s, led by those intrepid women working for the abolition of slavery. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, they linked their work for equal rights for African Americans to their own desires to control their property, to enter certain professions, to have a voice and a vote in the government which asked for their allegiance. And after more than 50 years of marching, protesting, and advocating for women's suffrage, the passage of that 19th Amendment saw the first wave of feminism ebbing, but not receding completely. In the 1940s, many women, symbolized by Rosie the Riveter, worked in the war industries, finding that having their own income and making a real contribution to their country gave them a sense of worth, of independence, a glimpse of what was possible outside the home. And after the war ended and men returned to those jobs, many women then returned to being homemakers, a role that increasingly proscribed their proper place. Some, however, felt a sense of loss, of emptiness, a sense that being a homemaker was not quite as fulfilling as it was portrayed in ads for the household products, TV shows like Ozzie and Harriet, and the seemingly endless articles in women's magazines on creative ways to use Campbell's tomato soup or lime jello. Well, when the feminine mystique came out in 1963, it provided the context and the name for what Friedan called the problem with no name. By the early 1970s, as a new single mother with 2 young daughters, I partnered with a friend to establish a bookstore specializing in antiquarian books. That means old, collectible, sometimes valuable, not always, and out-of-print books. Responding to my own interests and those of others riding the crest of the second wave of feminism, I developed a specialization in books by and about women, especially literature. I also found that even though I could vote, getting a credit card in my own name was not easy. Most banks wanted a man's name, i.e., a regular wage earner, on that card. I also found there was a perception that women-owned businesses were less serious, more like hobbies. For those women looking for employment, want ads, if you'll remember, want ads in the paper were segregated. Jobs for men, jobs for women. Rarely were the listings for women in fields of like management or professional areas beyond teaching or nursing. Friedan's book brought these issues that had been simmering into the cultural conversation. Yes, Betty Friedan was a visionary woman, but her vision, as seen in The Feminine Mystique, was limited in several ways. After all, she was a product of her own time. In her book, you do not read stories of low-income or poorly educated women, women of color, women who worked at any job or jobs that they could get to put food on the table for their families. Fulfillment be damned. Friedan focused on women whose lives, for the most part, were like hers. White women who were middle class, well-educated, and lived in middle or higher income communities. Women who had the capacity and the freedom to take steps to change their unfulfilled lives. Later, as a founder of NOW, the National Organization for Women, Friedan did not always play well with other feminists. She tried to exclude lesbians from public roles and refused to address their concerns. She felt lesbians would lower the acceptance value of the National Organization for Women. In addition, her public concern and criticisms of other feminist leaders often caused divisions among the ranks of feminists. But she remained a major voice for women, and in 1970 called for a major national strike for equality, which helped unite the mainstream NOW leaders with younger women who were forming women's liberation groups across the country. Despite its shortcomings, The Feminine Mystique captivated a generation of women. Women who, like me, were experiencing societal changes that raised awareness that our work as full-time housewives was less essential to families and less fulfilling personally. We realized, often for the first time, we could participate in those social changes and use our educations and talents in meaningful work as equal participants. And we became part of the second wave of feminism. Friedan's book had a profound impact on the lives of American women. By combining her scholarly research with compelling personal stories, Friedan's book became a life changer for many women. She critiqued the mainstream social sciences, especially the commonly accepted myths about controlling mothers and weak men. She wrote, "If you want men to be free of controlling wives and mothers, you must free women from the compulsion to focus all their energy on marriage and motherhood." Stephanie Kuntz, in her book, A Strange Stirring, notes that Friedan's book built personal and political bridges between the older woman who gave the book to her daughter or a young niece, a housewife who got it from her young babysitter, a daughter who read the book and began to empathize with her mother's anger or depression. The feminine mystique awakened people to the tremendous disparity in the way male and female workers were treated and how they were paid in American society. Made them aware of the laws and the social mores that kept women second-class citizens and discriminated against them in the workplace and in the community. Made them aware of the external barriers that kept women from achieving their potential and the internal voices that led women to doubt their own potential and step away from their aspirations and dreams. Betty Friedan, like those 19th century suffragettes, agitated the inner revolution that must come before any transformation. It is the inner revolution that changes hearts and minds, that inspires others to find the voices that go on to speak out against sexism, racism, classism. As we leave this sanctuary today, let each of us take a moment to think of how your lives and the lives of women you love have changed through the commitment of visionary and yes, courageous women. And in doing so, let us join Alice Walker and sing from memory songs of what each of us needs once more to hear. And so may it be. And now let us